In this video, I want to talk about the differences between really cheap microphones and really expensive microphones, or at least mid-price microphones, because really expensive for microphones is money that I don't have. And frankly, most people don't. So for the first time in quite a long time, I've bought a decent microphone. For a while, I was using a really, really great kind of in-betweeny microphone. It was the Deity D3 Pro. And that was great. It was honestly a really good microphone. The thing that was annoying about it is that it kind of fell between two stools. It wasn't the convenience of like an on-camera microphone quite as much as something like the Røde Video Micro, which doesn't take batteries and no charging. It's just a great microphone for that kind of vlogging type stuff when you just want to throw something on your camera and get going. And it wasn't quite as good as a dedicated like XLR microphone that will go into something like this with, you know, phantom power and that kind of thing. I think my main gripe is batteries. I just don't love having to charge batteries in stuff. That's why phantom powered microphones are great, and that's why something like the Røde Video Micro is really great, because there's no batteries in it. They're powered by the camera. But I got rid of that a while ago. I got rid of the Deity D3 Pro about a year ago now, just because it just wasn't there for me. And what I did was I bought a pair of really cheap short condenser microphones. Now these are kind of the thing that you use for like drums and stuff. So Røde has one, the NTG5. They come as a pair, and they're little short They're these little guys, super short. They have a microphone capsule at the top, which is like a cardioid pickup pattern. And I'm sure that the expensive ones of these are really, really great. But I bought a pair for £22, and I wasn't expecting a lot. These are phantom powered microphones, so XLR. They require phantom power. If you don't know what that is, check out Alex Knickerbocker, especially his like first couple of videos, because he is a wealth of knowledge on all things audio. But to my surprise with these things, they were fantastic. They weren't fantastic. They were fantastic for their price. Having two of them meant that I could use them for things that are not really supposed to be used for. I was using these to do my like, face-to-face interviews. These were working as like podcasting mics or almost. And turn yourself into a manager, basically.
Yeah. And he has great stories about, it might have been Buther or one of those type of companies.
They're not great for plosives when they're up close, but they did the job, and for 22 quid you can't really argue. And that's what I've been using for these videos pretty much always, unless I'm on my smaller camera. If I'm set up like this, it's going to be these. And so these have been the audio that you've been hearing for nearly a year now. I've actually got less complaints in the last year than I got previous to that. But I've had a saved search on eBay that like notifies me every time something like an NTG3 pops up. One came up for a good deal. It's not used, it's an open box, so it must have been on display somewhere or something like that. The guy had two for sale. It was at $380, I offered $320, and it arrived the next day, which was a very pleasant surprise for eBay. You've been listening to a combination of the Behringer C2 and the Røde NTG3. And here, when I'm editing, is where I find out whether I've wasted my money and I could have just stuck with the Behringers, or I've upgraded enough from £11 to £320. And so I'm going to see, and I'm going to come back to you once I've looked this over on the computer. I'm going to put some decent headphones on. I'm going to see what the audio difference is. What? Oh, for fuck. I wish I'd done that sooner. So I've just had a listen to the audio side by side, and the difference is, it's upsetting. It's genuinely upsetting how much better the Røde is. So the Røde NTG3, if you buy it new from, you know, a reputable supplier in the UK, it's about £700, between sort of £550 and £700, depending on, I don't know, fluctuations in markets. But basically, it's about 700 quid. I got this one, as I said, X display model, 320 quid. At that point, it's still 30 times more expensive than the Behringer. But the sound quality, the difference in that is more than 30 times better. Honestly, it sounds so much better. I'm going to play you some side-by-sides. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I mean, he said that, but Did he really put it into practice? Now that we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure, we are met on a great battlefield of that war. I just want to sort of describe it just in case you're listening on some you're listening on an iPhone or you're listening on some really crappy speakers or something. Basically, the Røde is a lot more focused in on my voice. It's also less noisy and it's getting the bass as well. I've got them both pointed kind of like in this area, just below my mouth. Some of your vocal presence comes from your chest. Obviously, a lot of it comes from your mouth, but some of it comes from here. Briefly, that's where you should point the microphone. This one's, it's about that far away from me. The Behringer's a little bit further away, but only like 10 centimeters more. The Behringer sounds really thin and reedy and quite noisy. I've had some decent luck with playing with the EQs and getting a little bit more bass out of it and thinning out that top end sound, that reediness. It's hard to describe. I'm not very good at audio stuff, but hearing the difference between the two makes me understand audio a little bit more, if that makes any sense. The Behringer, like I said, I've had some luck playing about with the EQ. You get a bit more bass, a bit more vocal presence. But because you're dealing with quite a lot of noise, it makes that a difficult task. It basically makes it harder for it to sound good once you play about with those levels because you're raising bits of it, so you're adding more noise. Now you can kind of remove that, but then you end up with other difficulties. You sound a little bit robotic. It can sound tinny and weird. Just doesn't sound great. Straight out of the box, this thing, doing what it should be doing, is fantastic. It cuts out so much of the environmental noise, which in here, there's quite a lot of. This Rode NT-G3 isolated so much more of my voice compared to everything else that's going on around it, which is what a shotgun microphone will do. That's why they're longer, that's why they've got the cutouts down the edge. The Behringer isn't designed to do that, and I wasn't expecting it to do that. When you get it close in, it sounds okay. The problem is when you compare it to something that's actually good. Now, do I think that spending another, an additional £700 to £1,000 on something like a Sennheiser, insert name here, because I can't remember what it's called, do I think that's worth it? For me, probably not. If I really need that top-end audio quality, well, for one, it's probably not going to be on my videos, these videos. It's going to be on the work that I do. And if I need that, I would rather spend the money each time I do a shoot bringing someone in who's got their own audio gear, who knows what they're doing, who knows how to monitor it properly, record it properly, has that top-end gear. That's a better investment in my mind than me spending a load of money on a fancy microphone. So I think I've hit the peak of what I need at the moment. But what do I recommend you do? Well, I think it depends on what you're doing. If you're making YouTube videos on a small mirrorless camera, something like the Rode Video Micro or one of the competing versions of that. So that could be the Deity version, which is quite cool, the D4 Duo, I think it's called, where you've got two microphones on there. That's quite interesting. Or one of the sort of lesser known brands, which are slightly cheaper, but some people say are better in some ways. I would recommend something like that. I'll put some links down below to some of those. If you're going to spend more than a couple £100 on a microphone, you know that you're at that point. And for me, I'm well past that point. I was using stuff that probably wasn't good enough, but was getting me by. Spend within your means. There's a definite tendency to kind of go, well, I should spend the most money right up front so that I'm not buying like duplicates down the line. That's all well and good, but if I'd have done that 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I would have bought something different probably to what I needed, and I wouldn't have learned what sounded good. I wouldn't have learned why the Rode sounded better than the Behringer or the Deity D3, the on-camera one. I wouldn't have learned that stuff. So I kind of think maybe it's worth, buying, renting, borrowing the cheaper end of things, learning that, finding that you're hitting your limits with it, and then move on. Because at that point, you'll kind of know what you want. And you'll also have built up the infrastructure around it. It's all well and good going out and buying a really nice microphone, but if you've got nowhere to mount it so that it can point at you in the right spot, then, you're kind of doing it wrong. Hopefully this sort of budget versus pro thing is interesting to you guys, because I've got a couple more of them. There's one I did a while ago that I should follow up on. I'll link that here. It's about camera bags. And I'm also just working on one because I've had to upgrade to a Tethered Tools cable because the cheap ones just weren't cutting it anymore. So stay tuned for that. I will see you next time. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. And laters.